virgins all fell asleep, and at midnight a cry went out that the bridegroom cometh. And all 10 virgins woke up, but they weren't all good virgins. In fact, it was half and half. And so that was true. As they preached what was the midnight cry, which basically was the second angel's message, the earlier advancement of truth was the first angel's message. And then it went well at first because all the churches would open their doors and Miller could preach, and the Baptist, the Methodist, and any of the Protestant churches welcomed him at first. But as they got closer to the time, they not only would not let him preach, but they started disfellowshipping people who believed what he was teaching. And so as we come to the midnight cry, the primary message was Babylon is fallen. Now, the Catholic Church is not included in the second angel's message because the Catholic Church was in a fallen condition for centuries. But the second angel's message was a primary message in regard to the Protestant churches, that they had fallen. And if you read there in Great Controversy, you'll get a little bit of a picture about what those Protestant churches were like earlier. For instance, they didn't have dances. They didn't have gambling in the church. And we could go on with a whole list of things. They didn't do those things beforehand, but now that they were throwing out the godly ones, they took a nosedive. And in fact, one of the greatest Protestant evangelists by the name of Finney, if you want to read an interesting biography, read about Finney. He was truly a man of God. And not only was he used to bring revivals in many, many places, but God called him to start a self-supporting college called Oberlin College. And it was the work-study program, and it was following a lot of the things that God has told Seventh-day Adventists to do. So he was quite a powerful man. Well, he made a statement, and Ellen White quotes it in Great Controversy, that, we have communion service and nobody gives their heart to God. And he goes on with a list of things that shows the deterioration of the church. And he finally ends by saying, well, that's enough of a painful list. We won't tell you the rest, because the churches were really falling away from Christ. But at the same time that the churches were falling away from Christ, the Millerites were on fire for God. And they were getting ready, expecting Jesus to come. First, as I mentioned, in 1843, but then God blessed them with a very diligent student. And there are two ways to arrive at the date. One way is to get the exact date of the decree when the command was given to rebuild Jerusalem, and the other one is to check out the exact atonement date, Day of Atonement, for that year. And either way, it comes to October 22, 1844. And so as they began to arrive at that conclusion, a new excitement which attended the midnight cry began to sweep the country. Now, this time they couldn't get so many. The ones that had gotten disappointed the first time, many of them couldn't get inspired again, and almost all of them were the slowest to get inspired again. But finally, before October 22, all of them were inspired that this time we've got it right. This time we're on track. So we'll start with that with some quotations. Now this text was discovered afterward. Their mind was not drawn to it beforehand, but it was a great comfort afterward. In Revelation 10, verse 9. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. Well, that little book was the book of Daniel. As Miller had been studying verse by verse in the Bible, he started with Genesis. And then as he came to the book of Daniel, he began to discover some things that led him to the conclusion that Jesus would come in about 25 years. Then he studied 9 more years before he had the courage to even share it. But it was in the mouth, notice that, sweet as honey. Is it that sweet to us today that Jesus is about to come? Now, we don't have a prediction of when he will come, but because it seems like he has tarried for a while, it's easy to lose that urgency and that eagerness that he's coming. And I believe that's one reason we need to be reminded at least once a year on this topic, because if there's a difference between their eagerness and ours, we need a revival. So in the mouth it was sweet as honey, but when it hit the belly it became bitter. The bitter disappointment is being predicted here by the prophet nearly 2,000 years before it happened. And that's why when they discovered that, they realized, wow, we're not an offshoot. We're not a crazy people. We're on target. From one of our historians, F.D. Nickel, he recorded this in his book, The Midnight Cry. Scarcely more than 2 weeks before the anticipated great day, William Miller wrote Himes a letter which began thus: I see a glory in the 7th month which I never saw before. Although the Lord had shown me the typical bearing of the 7th month 1.5 years ago, yet I did not realize the force of the types. In other words, he didn't realize it would be so exact to actually give a day in which this would happen. But he had agreed with Himes sometime before that, this type had a bearing on it. Now, blessed be the name of the Lord. I see a beauty, a harmony, and an agreement in Scriptures for which I have long prayed, but did not see until today. Thank the Lord. I am almost home. Glory, glory, glory. And he catch the Spirit in the hand there as he thought, in 2 weeks, Jesus is going to be here. He was so happy. Well, as you know, it turned bitter, but we need to see both beauty and the purpose for the disappointment. Same book, Southard, who was the editor of the Midnight Cry, that was a little magazine that was sent out to all the believers that were looking forward to the coming of Jesus. And here's what the editor said. in the first issue of October. The weight of evidence that the Lord will come on the 10th day of the 7th month is so strong that I heartily yield to its force. And I intend, by the help of the Lord, to act as if there was no possibility of mistake. To act as if I knew that in less than 1 month, the opening heavens would reveal my Savior. We have a saying, maybe you've heard it, going for broke. That's what he did. He said, I'm not going to allow doubts in my mind anymore. I'm going to plan everything about my whole life and my ministry through the midnight cry. I'm going to plan it as though it's actually going to happen on that day. Now, you've probably read some of the other things that people did. One man closed his shop, and sometime, forget exactly how long it was before, closed his shop and stopped running his business and spent the last few days making sure that he was ready to meet Jesus when he came. And put a sign in his window that would remind anybody that looked in the window that Jesus was coming. Another man, maybe several people, up in New England, they left their potatoes in the ground. Now in New England, you want to dig your potatoes before October 22. But they left them in the ground, and it's very interesting what happened, because that year there was a blight that affected everybody's potatoes that dug them on schedule. But after Jesus didn't come on October 22, he dug his potatoes and they were fine. They were okay. So that's just a few of the interesting things that people did who thought like the editor of the Midnight Cry. In the 6-volume biography of Ellen White, Volume 1, we read this, page 53. With bated breath, the Adventists, no less than 50,000 and probably nearer 100,000, scattered largely across the northeastern portion of the North America, arose to greet the eventful day, Tuesday, October 22, 1844. If we can try to picture what it would be like for them to wake up tomorrow morning, October 22, and tomorrow morning you're expecting that Jesus is going to come. You don't know whether he's going to come in the morning, at noon, afternoon, or before midnight. They didn't understand the sundown to sundown. So they were expecting that at some time in that day, how would they spend the last day? Expecting that day to meet Jesus. Well, a lot of them went to church. And there was a lot of crazy editorials in the newspaper looking, especially after the disappointment. I saw one picture of a church with the church members hanging on to the bottom. And, the church was going up in the air, going up to heaven. They had a lot of crazy things going on. And they were accused of having made ascension robes. And one even said that the shops that were full of cloth were emptied by these Adventists who bought all this cloth. There was not a bit of truth in any of it. However, either in church or at home or even outdoors, they were waiting. And if you visit William Miller's home in New York, they will take you out to the Ascension Rock, where some of the people were waiting. And, there weren't the unusual things they're talking about. For instance, they said some of them got up in the trees hoping to be closer. and being able to be taken. No, those are all ideas to cast reflection upon these people, making them look silly and stupid, but that was not true. In the 4th volume of Spirit of Prophecy, it says, "But again, they were destined to disappointment. The time of expectation passed, and their Savior did not appear. With unwavering confidence, they had looked forward to his coming, and now they felt as did Mary when coming to the Savior's tomb and finding it empty. She exclaimed with weeping, 'They have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him.'" So this truly was a very bitter experience. And it can be compared, although we're told that the bitter experience the disciples had was worse than this one. So it was bad, but it was not as bad as the one where they expected Jesus to become king, and instead he was crucified, which ended all of their hopes. They felt no good can come now. So it dawned on me as I thought about that comparison that there is no need for Seventh-day Adventists to be embarrassed that our forefathers of the Adventist Church were in that movement and expected Jesus to come. There's no more embarrassment than it would be to be one of the 12 disciples or one of the 120 disciples who were more disappointed than we as Adventists were, and yet nobody questions whether they were crazy. You know, everybody understands that they were the true followers of God. The ones that said, no, he's not the Messiah, they were not the true followers of God. So those that rejected the first angel's message, and then they rejected the second angel's message, they were not the people of God. It was the ones that got disappointed that were the people of God. So we have a wonderful heritage. And even I got a copy of the current, not the current one, but Church History magazine from this United States. And I forget what year it was, but they had a whole bunch of revivals. They had kind of plotted them out. And I was thankful to see that they put the Millerite revival in there. Now, they don't like the Millerite one, but they had to admit it was a tremendous revival. And so it was a godly revival. Now, this personal testimony, I think, captures how they felt better than any other thing I've found. Let Hiram Edson tell, in his own words, of the sorrow that took hold upon him. Quote, "Our fondest hopes and expectations were blasted, and such a spirit of weeping came over us as I never experienced before. It seemed that the loss of all earthly friends would have been no comparison. We wept and wept till the day dawned. I mused in my own heart, saying, my Advent experience has been the richest and brightest of all my Christian experience." So now he's reflecting back on all that uncontrollable weeping that they had when midnight passed and Jesus did not show up. They were sure then, once they passed midnight, that he was not going to come. Some tried to set other dates and so on, and Ellen White has been shown that they will keep doing that until they set a date that's too far in the future, and Jesus will come before that one. So don't be influenced by any dates. That date was correct, but there's another event which we'll talk about in the church service. Now, yesterday, I had to perform a funeral for someone that was not a Seventh-day Adventist, but we've had some contact with them, especially my mother, and so they wanted one of us at Wildwood, and I was the only one available, so I was picked to do the funeral. The kind of weeping that most people do at a funeral is just heart-wrenching. I mean, they cry with just no tomorrow. I just felt so bad for these individuals that were weeping so much. But it gives a little understanding into what happened here. And yet, as Hiram Edson thought back upon it afterward, he had some pretty good thoughts. And it goes on. The earnest, sincere believers had given up all for Christ. You know, they lost their friends, except for those that were willing to believe it too. They lost a lot of things and had shared His presence as never before. Now that's the key one. God was with that movement. They experienced the presence of God as they were preparing for October 22. They had, as they believed, given their last warning to the world and expecting soon to be received into the society of their divine master and the heavenly angels. They had, to a great extent, withdrawn from the unbelieving multitude. Now here's another key point. With intense desire, they had prayed, "Come, Lord Jesus, and come quickly." Have we been doing that? Could that describe our prayers for the second coming of Christ? That we are intensely pleading, or are we just asking in a general tone of voice? If we are not pleading that way, then we have lost some of our zeal for the second coming of Christ. This movement was founded in zeal for the second coming of Christ. And while I'm on that point, I suppose everyone that studies the history of the Israelites thinks, what a terrible bunch of people to have to wander 40 years in the wilderness because they didn't want to do what they were supposed to do. But as I mentioned earlier, guess what? It's 173 years tomorrow since we were close to the coming of Jesus. Now, if you study all the quotations, maybe sometime I can do that with you, about when Jesus could have come, He could have come, Ellen White says, a long time before 1868. Which means that He could have come within a few years of this date. He couldn't come on that date because He had a work to do. But He could come shortly after that. However, because we aren't in a hurry for Him to come, then He's had to wait 173 years already. Certainly He's not going to wait much longer, is He? I mean, that's a long time. But He had not come. And now to take up again the heavy burden of life's cares and perplexities, and to endure the taunts and sneers of a scoffing world, was indeed a terrible trial of faith and patience. If we think we get criticized today, well, we have nothing compared to what they got after the disappointment. In the first volume of the biography of Ellen White, page 60, it says, through the early winter months of 1844 and 5, the Advent believers in Portland, Maine, and in fact elsewhere, seldom smiled. On the streets, they were taunted and ridiculed by former friends and acquaintances. And I suppose most of them stayed home as much as they could, because any time they'd be out on the street, they would be ridiculed by the others about what didn't happen on October 22. They often had to meet the assertion, "You were a set of fools and fanatics," or "I told you so." The uniform testimony of those who passed through the experience was that only those who had endured it could realize the depth of disappointment and its reality. So we can try to enter into what they suffered, but we probably cannot fully grasp how they felt. Because in their mind, it was a done deal. He was coming. There was no if about it. He was coming. And when he didn't, oh, how sad they were. Ellen White put this in the Review and Herald of April 14, 1904. After the passing of the time in 1844, a number of the brethren and sisters were assembled in a meeting. All were very sad, for the disappointment had been sore. Presently, a man came in crying, "Courage in the Lord, brethren, courage in the Lord." This he repeated again and again, till every face was aglow, and every voice was lifted in praise to God. And this morning I say to you, courage in the Lord. Ever since 1844, I have been proclaiming present truth, and today this truth is dearer to me than ever before. Is October 22 dearer to you than ever before? Tomorrow is the day. I hope as you wake up tomorrow that you will think about those that went before us, who that very day were so excited about Jesus coming, and they kept expecting it all through that day. As it began to near midnight, they probably had some questions in their mind. Is he going to come or not? But they still wouldn't give it up until midnight struck. And that's when the weeping began, because Jesus hadn't come. Let us try, seeking God, to have restored the anticipation of Jesus coming, because it affects everything we do. It affects how we do it, what we do. It affects everything. And if we have that interest to see him come, instead of, I was giving a Bible study this week to a man that's basically ready for baptism, but he does a lot of joking around. And he said to me, "Well, I hope Jesus doesn't come until I get my shop built." You know, but now he said he was just joking, and I trust he was. But he's a machinist, so he wants to have a nice shop all set up and everything. But I hope that that's not our attitude. It is the attitude of many that say, well, you know, I hope I can get this done. Even my own father, when he was young, he said, I hope Jesus doesn't come till I can get married. And, this idea of postponing to accomplish something, that's not the spirit that the Millerites had. We are eager, no matter how many plans it stops, we're eager to have him come and take us home. So may God bless you today as you think about it more, and tomorrow as well. Please think about it.